Hip, hip, hooray for DNA. It provides the key to the plans for making everything in you and me.
This here is nylon, and you might have heard of nylon before. It's actually a very popular fabric, and often we use nylon to make different types of clothing or swimming gear. So nylon is a fabric that we use to make clothes. Now nylon, recently there was an amazing discovery, and that discovery was that we actually managed to we made bacteria that fed off nylon, so that nylon was part of their food. Now why is that amazing? Well, nylon itself is actually an artificial or a synthetic fiber. So it's artificial or a synthetic fiber. That means there is more or less no organism that would have the enzymes naturally to break down nylon for food. Because it's man-made, there wouldn't be any organisms that would be able to use nylon as a food. But we managed to eventually create a bacteria that could do that. And this is what this dot point is all about. It says students will process and analyze information from secondary sources to explain a modern example of natural selection. And that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to talk about the nylon feeding bacteria and how we made this happen. So what happened first, quickly I'm going to talk a bit about biology of bacteria and how they work. The bacteria I mentioned in the last video, or a video before that, is that bacteria itself doesn't replicate through asexual reproduction. It does something very similar to mitosis. It's not mitosis, it's called binary fusion, but similar to mitosis where you have your parent cell and that makes two daughter cells. These are identical, right? So these are identical from the parent cells for this process here. Now what can happen is obviously there can be mistakes in the replication. There can be mutations, which means that there might be, for example, this might be when everything's normal. So this might be a normal daughter cell. Offspring is identical to the parent. Whereas here we have a mutation. So this one would be different. There might be a slight difference in this one compared to the other one, to the parent one. Now why is that important? That's because that's how the nylon became food for some of the bacteria. So what you can imagine initially we had this scenario. We have nylon, which is these yellow squiggly things. That's inside a solution. In that same solution we have the bacteria that can't digest nylon. Now here we have the bacteria in dark green. And the ones that can digest nylon will be in light green. As you can see, at the moment there are none here. But what they did is they made a solution where they had no food. So there's no food source, or very minimal food source, and there was lots of nylon. So what happened if these couldn't digest nylon? What would happen? Well, they would all die. Why would they die? Because they have no food source. It's because they can't eat nylon, because they can't produce the enzymes to break down the nylon. They would all die due to starvation. Now, what happened eventually is they could still have some offspring because they replicate so fast. Before they would starve, they could have some offspring. Most of them would have the green offspring, which would be no use. They would all die as well. But then there would have been a mutation. We said that mutations kind of happen when you have your offspring, and there would have been a mutation that randomly produced an enzyme that allowed it to digest nylon. Right. So this one made a daughter that could then actually digest nylon. So what happened now? Well, these ones all died because they still didn't have any mechanism to feed off the nylon. But the one that was randomly produced now had an advantage because it could actually eat food. It had food around it. So this one replicated. And once it's replicated, its numbers grew and grew. And it loved this whole new environment because nylon itself was its food source. It could feed off other things as well, but it could feed off nylon. In this case, only the nylon was there for food. So over time, the original bacteria died out, and we had these new nylon-eating bacteria which started to dominate. Right? And this is the bacteria. This is nylon here, and you can see here the bacteria itself. And yeah, so this was how we make nylon. We've got two different types of acids, and this molecule is a massive molecule that has no normal enzyme that we have to break it down. But these green ones here, so these ones, would be, because of the change in their DNA sequence, they made an enzyme that could actually destroy these bonds, and once these bonds would be broken, right, once the substrate was broken down into products, then you could actually use that for energy. And that occurred because of the mutations. This is why this is an example of modern natural selection, right? So the dopant itself says process and adds information from secondary sources to explain a modern example of natural selection. And one example, there's other ones as well, but one example is the nylon feeding bacteria. And how that happened is we had lots of nylon and lots of bacteria, the same type of bacteria in solution. We gave them time to replicate. The problem for them was they had no food source because they couldn't digest nylon. But then randomly there was a mutation which allowed maybe only one of the actual bacteria of the billions of bacteria in there to digest nylon. Its offspring had that adaptation. And it was it was in its environment, it was a favorable trait or a favorable mutation. It could use that mutation to get food, and thereby it produced more and more numbers, and eventually we had a new type of bacteria that could feed off nylon. Now it says modern example, and I can guarantee you that most modern examples would be bacteria or other single-celled organism based. And why? Because even like punctuated equilibrium or Darwin's theory of evolution, they still require tens of thousands in the case of punctuated equilibrium, or millions of years in the case of Darwin's theory of evolution to occur. So if we have, in our lifetime, we wouldn't be able to see, let's say, an animal change to a different animal. That would be, we only live for 100 years. But because bacteria, they spawn so fast, they produce so fast, we can observe evolution in bacteria. We wouldn't be able to observe in our lifetime evolution occurring in an animal or an insect. It would take too long. But we can observe it in bacteria. And we have with that nylon eating bacteria. I hope that was useful.
Thank you for watching.